Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, it's wonderful to talk about something known as relationships. Well, sure, many of us as we approach midlife understand what those are. We've probably dated a lot, maybe even been married once, maybe even twice. It seems to be the norm when it comes to relationships that we tend to fall out of favor with our spouses, loved ones, and we try to figure out how do we pick up those pieces and put them back together again and make forward and be able to do the things that we need to do to make relationships work. Sometimes you even look in the mirror and say to yourself, where did I go wrong? Why can't I make things work, and why don't things work out for me? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who's going to be talking about the Clearmind method. He will explain their use of an experiential, a spiritual transpersonal paradigm model for relationship issues through Fear to Love program, which has helped many couples, especially when betrayals and affairs seem to be rampant these days. We're going to talk about real-life stories to help you see your own way through situations. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dwayne O'Kane, and he is going to be talking about the Clearmind way to better relationships. Dwayne, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Hi, Daniel.
What is Clearmind? This is an interesting word just by itself.
Oh, my. That's the toughest question to actually ask. The simplest question is the toughest one. It formed about 20 years ago when I was coming out of a long, very serious depression, mostly due to a relationship breakdown. And I was a well-known family therapist up here in Vancouver. And nothing in my training in Western psychology could really address the profound nature of the abject misery I was in. And I thought to myself, my oh my, if I don't know my way out of here, how am I going to help others? And so Clearmind was really birthed out of what I had to personally do myself to address or undress the issues that were in my life at the time. So from that, I was from my private practice, I started implementing some of these methods that I was using to really save my own life into my practice. And it soon became very, very popular, and I had a long waiting list of clients, and I could not see them all. And I had some professionals that I was even seeing as clients, and they wanted to learn this method that I had designed at the time. And it spread into training others by developing a 3-year counselor training program, a certified counselor training program up here in Canada, as well as into many workshops that my wife, met my wife 3 years after this, who is also she's got a master's in clinical psych, and she was a very good partner in every respect in terms of our careers and personal life. And so now we travel the world. We have centers in Stockholm and Dublin, Cork, Ireland, Liverpool, London, Berlin, Calgary, and Portland and Vancouver, where we teach workshops mostly centered on relationship, as well as advanced workshops in leadership and addictions and all those men's and women's issues and all those sort of things. But Clearmind that's how it was birthed. And the name Clearmind was apropos in that was, we really firmly believe that once we clear the decks of all the insane belief systems that we have polluted our minds with, as we've encountered going through difficulties in life, we just put more and more obstacles and rigid belief systems in the way of experiencing the peace and sanctity of what happens when you have a clear mind to fully experience the majesty and peace of being in the here and now, both in your personal life and with a partner, even more appropriately.
When you think of relationships, it's quite interesting when you see people. They first get together, they're excited, they throw their best colors forward, You know, they step into the relationship, and, you know, once they're together, there probably is, it's almost, I don't know, something you can count on. And it's rare that you see the couple that continues that feeling of the best colors forward for years down the road. And then all of a sudden, it's sort of like a look somewhere else where they feel this need, an individual, to do the same thing that they did that got them in the relationship in the first place, but with someone else. Yeah. What causes this? What do you think that is?
Well, that's a really, really good question, and it'll speak to the heart of what I want to talk about. You know, most of us think when we reach a crisis in a relationship that it's a sign the relationship is over, or, you know, that the other person has to change, that somebody has to make some kind of major shift in order for the relationship to work. But usually it ends. A relationship can only progress as far as somebody needs to be right about something. And that's it.
I like that.
And then it's quite simple, but it's quite true. And we are of the mind that this crisis is a natural evolutionary step in the ladder of the growth of a relationship, and it's actually when a relationship could finally begin as opposed to end. Because what happens in that crisis is when two people get together, you know, both people are carrying wounds that are not so much revealed and look to the partner for a rescue. I have met the one that is going to either complete me in some way, where I'm going to get a self reflected back to me by my partner. They're going to give me what I think I need. And we celebrate this in the Western world, unfortunately, as some form of healthy romance. And it's actually not very healthy. That the assumption there is I am lacking, I am flawed, or there's something wrong with me. I have met the person that's going to complete me. That's quite a crazy contract to put on another person, and a contract they ultimately cannot fulfill, because no matter how much that person provides, the apparent substance or the needs or the material to make that person feel better, if that person's belief about themselves has not shifted or changed, it doesn't matter how much it'll be like filling the Grand Canyon with a shovel. You can be really good at that shovel, but it's not going to do the job. And so we look for rescue, and that initial period, that romance period, is like, I have met somebody is actually doing it for me. They have rescued us from the dilemma inside ourselves, that we think that mission is going to succeed. And this is what really, you know, my relationship crisis was because of that. I grew up in a alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic, binge drinking, Irish classic alcoholic, who came home to declare war on my mother. And I was the only son, and I had three sisters. And I sort of designed my personality as the savior of women. So I met a woman in the mid-'80s who needed saving. She was the wounded bird, and I was Superman. And she had a terrible, terrible story. And initially, I mean, our connection was phenomenal, like the electric. That she was supporting my misconceived notion that I am Superman. That's what I have to be in relationships in order to qualify. Underneath it all, I had a big, crazy question about myself, that I am, you know, my worst fear is I'm going to be like my dad, or that I'm going to make a mistake, or I'm not good enough, that men are guilty. All, like, I had, we call them suspicions of self, ruminating underneath the surface all the time. But I met this woman that just revered me as the savior. Like I was Prince Valiant. I had just saved her from her horrible past. She had been sexually abused by her father and abandoned by her mother at the age of 4. Terrible, terrible story. But I was this Superman. But in short order, I was not able to rescue the fair maiden successfully. All of a sudden, she started finding fault in who I was. And I couldn't handle that. I just, oh my God, she's criticizing me. I'm not Superman. I'm Darth Vader. And we entered a state of crisis, trying to, keep this kind of contract going. And I just kept on trying to find new and better ways of being that super guy. And then, of course, she met other men along the route who, for the short term, would satisfy that Superman component, and I would fall into deep, deep depression because she had just hit my worst wound, that there was something profoundly wrong with me, and I had to prop myself back up and gain some more superpowers and take another run at it. And I tell you, my life was just totally falling apart. And this is what happens when two people get together. The rescue contract eventually collapses, and two people get stuck. And what we help people learn how to do is to instead of looking for rescue from the pain that is inside of them, to ask for help instead to heal the pain that's inside of them. It's a very simple distinction, but the quality of your life profoundly changes, and the quality of your relationship profoundly changes, because now it can evolve instead of holding this crazy contract on the other and what they are supposed to do to fill you up, or in the case of men most of the time, it's not to fill us up. It's to stay away from hitting buttons in us where we feel our guilt. So we have rules we put in the relationship that you won't ask me how I feel, you won't press me too much for contact, leave me alone, let me be independent, let me go to hang out with the boys and down in the garage or work on my gadgets. Stay away from me, because if you get too close, I'm going to feel that guilt about what it means to be a man. That I'm actually, my worst fear is I'm a disappointment or I'm a failure. Mm-hmm. And so men have, most of the time, the stereotype, it's not, of course, the case in every situation, but the stereotype is fairly accurate, that men particularly design rules in relationship to retain themselves by having to have distance. Women, stereotypically are advancing in relationships in order to get a self. And this is where the relationship finally hits a wall, where there is no movement, and it can end because two people are not prepared to take a look at themselves and ask for help with what they believe about themselves. Instead, they're asking for a rescue for the other one to be a certain way so they don't have to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start acting out. Like there's all kinds of ways we have our stance. Women will overfunction, men will underfunction, men will turn to pornography, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, zoning out on the couch. Women making plans all the time, trying to orchestrate some sort of connection, overfunctioning, having eating disorders, all dealing with that anxiety that comes up when it hits that wall.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I think I'm starting to go on and on here.
No, it's pretty exciting, because what you're talking about, for our listeners out there, they really should, I feel, pay attention to the fact that what happens is, again, as I was describing earlier in the program, is that, the relationship, it starts out, it's exciting. And I'm remembering, for instance, Barbara DeAngelis back in the 1980s. She was really well known for making love work, and she said something that was so true, and I think, what she had to say really resonated with people, because here was somebody who had been in 5 marriages. So obviously she understood about why relationships don't work, because she had certainly been in her fair share of them. But she says, the reason why relationships work in the beginning is because of how the other person makes us feel about ourselves. And isn't that what is interesting? It's almost like it's a con game that happens in the beginning, that we feel so good because of how the other person makes us feel about ourselves. But when they can't hold up that standard, which nobody could really,
nobody can.
They can't, for a period of time, then all of a sudden it's their fault that I'm not feeling as good about myself as they made me feel, in the first month or 6 months or a year, whatever it takes. And then pretty soon it's easy for us to pass that buck, to hand that baggage over and say, it's your fault that this isn't working. And it's a funny con game, because it's one that we actually play with ourselves. We're really, it's as a 5th grade teacher once said, if you're going to point your finger outward and blame somebody or something for the circumstance that you're in, take a look at the fact that you've got 3 fingers pointing back at you. And that's where you should start looking.
Right, start looking, and, in order to look, you have to first feel what's going on inside of you, and that's what most of us don't want to do. You know, cognitive work, simply understanding what those three fingers are pointing towards, will not do the trick. We have to feel once again what was going on inside of us that resulted in this kind of armor or mask personality that we have to present, or blaming personality on the other one. How come that guard was constructed in the first place, where it came from? And, you know, for me, those three fingers pointing back, where eventually I had to let my partner in on that 10-year-old kid that was actually sad, alone, had no one to turn to in the basement of his home, and let her have him instead of the personality that I designed to cover him up.
Ah. That must be difficult for couples to, I guess, reach that, what would be known in astronomy as the event horizon, you know, of the black hole, you know. Is it possible to cross that threshold? I mean, obviously it is, because, you know, Clearmind has found a way to do this. What makes it different from what seems to be out there? Again,
it's because it's not just a cognitive process. You know, the part in us that made it up has to show up, not just to talk about that. You know, for example, I'll give you an example. Catherine and I met in 1995. We were married a few years later, and we ran, even despite the fact that I was, you know, teaching this work, traveling the planet. We had our own relationship issues that came up, and one of them was, so what happened early on was, I was very, very busy with my work trying to make this company survive, and was avoiding deeper contact with her. And, you know, she would say things like, on the phone, what time are you going to be home? And I would feel this kind of surge inside of me, like, she's controlling me, she's needy, like, I don't know if I could take this, she's got some issues here, like, why does she just lay off?
Right.
What would come out of my mouth wouldn't be something as aggressive as that. It would be a little bit more disguised and eloquent, like I would just have some excuse about being busy, but occasionally things would come up, and I would say, you know, I wish you would just stop it. Like, if you were just nicer, maybe I'd want to come home. And she would say, well, maybe if you came home, maybe I'd be nicer. And we get into these kind of, showdowns where I'd be kind of pressing her to back off, and it would be very, very tense and very unhappy, and it would be a real stalemate. And I'd come home, and we'd have dinner, and things would be all right, but, you know, we're both mature enough and professional enough to know that we're not going to go into real adversarial, you know, volatile arguments. We're quite well behaved, but nonetheless it would be tense. Now, finally, one day, and I'll give you, this is a classic example of what you do and how you do it. You know, it happened again, and I came home, and instead of carrying on the Cold War, I sat down and I said, you know, every time you ask me to come home or get home on time, I feel like I have been blaming you for pressing me too much, controlling me too much. I make you the problem. And actually, I'll tell you what's happening for me. Every time you ask me to come home, I have to revisit the home I came from as a kid. It wasn't such a great place. There's a whole lot of pain associated with being home. That I am the son of my father, who was a reckless, aggressive alcoholic, putting damage and hurt onto women, and I was his son, and I feel like there was something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And every time you want me to come home, I hear that tone in your voice that I made a mistake or I'm a disappointment. I can't stand that feeling, because that's what I grew up with, that what it means to be a man. And I have blamed you for that feeling by making rules about you should stay away from me or be nice or do this, when actually this is my problem, not yours, and I've made it your problem. So I'm taking ownership of that. You know, I have to deal with that. That is my belief, my fear of what I am is my job and my responsibility. And I fell into her arms, and I was weeping, letting that kid finally be held by somebody, and letting her support me, not rescue me, but to just witness me and care for me as opposed to caretake me. She just cared for me as I did my personal work. And our relationship took a dramatic shift then, because the rules in the relationship were no longer, Catherine, my wife, you have to be this way so I don't have to feel that way. My feelings are my job. I'm going to be man enough to feel them. And it's a journey that is the hardest journey for men to take.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the experiential part of it. I had to let myself feel what I didn't want to feel and take ownership of it. And that's what our workshops and all of our work is about. Like when people come to the weekend, which is coming up in Portland, that is precisely what we do. We are in a circle. We present our stories about our current life situation, how it's currently stuck, and we take that journey inside to bring home that accountable, responsible, vulnerable part of ourselves in a powerful way.
Mm-hmm. It's a funny thing when you think about these, I guess you could call them demons, if you will, is that when we can no longer blame an outside source for the essence of why we feel the way we do, then we think we can just simply run away from that as though it's out there. And the fact is this shadow is following us the whole time. So one way or the other, it's going to be there until you're willing to turn and look at this and move through that. And go ahead.
Through it and correct it.
Right.
The part of that, when I present it to her, now I can actually correct it, because what I made up about myself actually isn't true. It isn't true that I am guilty, that I am bad, that I am wrong, that I am inadequate, that I am flawed, that I am all those things. But held in the basement of my psyche and never shown, it just kind of ferments. And like you said, it also doesn't remain neutral. It has impact. Like my stance starts creating the very thing I'm defending against. It doesn't make Catherine more friendly when I put up that armor. She ends up being the very thing that I'm defending against. Like all of a sudden I am getting criticism. And so it just reinforces the whole notion of keeping in the psyche in the first place, in the basement of our psyches. Mm-hmm. So it once revealed, I've often said I don't think Clearmind does healing work. I think we do revealing work, and healing is a natural process that occurs. Mm-hmm. When it's these problems started in relationship. All of them started in relationship as children, and they're only going to be corrected in relationship too. Not in a book, not in a lecture. It's what the work we do back in relationship.
I always felt in the many years that I've been broadcasting, when I interview, countless people that seem to have a way that helps us reveal ourselves, that there are two things that bring whatever our stuff is to the surface. That's relationships with someone else and money.
Yep.
You bring those two up, and it seems that it just comes to the surface rapidly. And I say, if you want to heal yourself, if you can find a way to plunge yourself into those two C's, boy, you can cleanse yourself if you're willing to face who you truly think you are. And I think that's right. What it is, just as you had said earlier, who we think we are. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Who we fear we are.
Fear we are. That's another way to look at it. Sure.
It's not even a thing. It's who we fear we are. So we have to walk through who we fear we are to discover who we truly are. There's no fast track around it. We have to go through. What is this? It's like a long overdue meeting with yourself, and we're all running around like. I can't remember who the comic was I saw on Conan. It was very funny. It was poignant. Like he was talking about texting and how busy everybody is, perpetually avoiding just being alone with yourself. Like we can't do it. We just can't do it. There's this big empty vacuum vacuous place inside of ourselves that we just bump up against. So we got to get busy. We got to do something. We got to avoid. We got to this, got to that. And it's that very place I'm talking about of finally, what do I fear I am? Just maybe it isn't the truth. We all think it is the absolute truth. It's not even, I call it a suspicion of self, but we think it's a certainty of self. It's not a question that I was flawed. It's not a question that I was guilty. It was a fact. And so my whole life was based on a reaction to that fact. The armor and the mask that I wore were appropriate given that was a fact. But it isn't a fact. And we don't discover that until we go in again and have some company, not just alone, but have some company. Their partner or these people in a workshop, that's what happens. All of a sudden we have witnesses and company in that place where we've made up these crazy, crazy ideas about ourselves, and we can finally connect again and finally correct them. And it's a very powerful, emotional, transformational experience.
That's pretty exciting to think about when you do these workshops, what actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is that like? I'm just trying to imagine as you facilitate these through Clearmind, what actually happens. I mean, wow. It really has that kind of effect, I'm sure.
We just completed a men's and women's course up here in Vancouver this weekend, where the women are in one room and the men in the other room for the whole weekend. We finally came together at the end. And when those group of men and women came together and joined and did their corrections with each other, I tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I've never seen such jubilation and excitement and dancing. And it's what happens is in basically just over 2.5 days. We spend the first part of the day introducing ourselves, introducing the material, introducing each other to the circle. We start checking in. And it is unbelievable over the course of 2 days what can happen to a group of people. I'm of the mind that, if we had the world leaders get together for 2.5 days, the same thing could happen. Like, the human nature wants to take that journey. Human nature is so tired of propping ourselves up in this armor and blame and attack and defense and strategy when everybody wants to come home. So I think it works because we as facilitators never forget that is the fundamental foundation of human nature. Is we actually want to be connected again. We want to be in love. We want to be helpful. We want to be, your interests are not separate from my own. That state of mind, and it is really. I'm addicted to those weekends because I just love watching human nature reveal itself. Like, I think people get a glimpse of human nature that is blinding. It is like a real revolution that goes on in your mind once you are given the material and you start walking through these processes. Like, we get a glimpse of human nature that we never knew existed before, and you cannot forget it. You can't forget it. You can't forget it when you look in your partner's eyes and see who they really are, as opposed to who you projected all over them, who you fear they are, who you paste, the personality you pasted on them. When you see the vulnerability and I think divinity of your partner, you are changed forever. Mm-hmm. You can't forget it. It's like riding a bike. You can't unlearn how to ride a bike.
You kind of think, as I listen to you, as the ideal that we ever believed we were flawed in the first place, mm-hmm. that we've always been whole, but it was through our thinking and even our experiences that we ever believed we were flawed. Is that an accurate way to look at all of this?
That's absolutely accurate. We're just really returning to our true selves. You're not becoming something. You're not going to something. You're returning to something. As children, I mean, this is just a simple little example, but, there's the baby lying in mother's arms, being breastfed. It's happy, blissful. I have my breast. I am connected. Everything is perfect. And the phone rings, and mother has to go to the phone. Child doesn't know what the phone is. All the child knows is mom is gone. And mm-hmm. in that's clinically, that's called an infinite moment of terror for the child. doesn't know whether the breast is ever going to come back, and starts trying on behaviors to get mother and the breast back. Tries behavior A, it doesn't work. Tries behavior B, it doesn't work. Behavior C works. I think I'll become behavior C. Like, this is who I'm going to become. This is who I have to become in my family of origin in order to gain acceptance and approval. All the while inventing something about self, a question about self. This is the birth of the suspicion of self. Like, who I am is not good enough for acceptance and approval. I have to be this in my family. And it works in your family for that period of time, but it is not going to work in terms of letting somebody get close to you again. So we come in clean. We come in connected, and we start developing these defenses pretty early on. And it's not just the phone, of course. That's just an innocuous example. Parents can have their own rules about the way they need you to be, given their losses and their life story and their expectations of you, because they don't want you to step on their toes, so you have to be a certain way to gain acceptance and approval. A lot of that is unconscious. But all of that is part of unveiling the real dynamics of what's going on underneath this whole system. What happened back there?
Mm-hmm.
Who did you have to become given your family story?
Mm-hmm.
And who did you leave behind believing that there was something essentially wrong with it? And it not being a question, it being a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't.
Now, Dwayne, you don't have to facilitate these workshops where someone has to be there. You do this all over the world, it sounds like, or most of the world anyway. Mm-hmm. How did this start for you? I mean, what was the bridge from where you were to where you are now, where you said, looking around at all these workshops that are available out there for people who want to heal their relationships, whether it's with someone else or just with themselves. I mean, there's a lot of, these dynamic so-called workshops that are out there and therapies. What was it for you that you moved forward on something like Clearmind?
Like I said, it started spilling over into my practice, and people were asking about it. And it so happened that there were therapists that were coming to see me for help that wanted to learn about it. So it just started spreading. And at the time, I was working as a family therapist for the social services up here in Canada. I don't know if that answers your question. What started it was just there was I just found it. It was just necessary. It was urgent. There was nothing else. There was nothing else to do, but what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. And is there a website people can find out more about this?
Yes, www.clearmind, one word, CLEARMIND.com, clearmind.com. Everything is on there. We have lectures on there. All the information you need to know about our organization is there. Our counselor training program. We're going to be down in Portland. My wife is going to be lecturing on Wednesday, October 9th at 7 p.m. at the Little Church in Northeast Portland. That's 5138 Northeast 23rd Avenue in Portland.
That's Portland, Oregon, right?
Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And her lecture is He Said, She Said. So it's going to be right in line with what we're talking about here. I'll be in the audience, so I may sneak up on the stage too. And then we're doing a workshop on October 11th to 13th in Portland at the same venue, the Little Church. If anybody wants to contact our sponsor there, his name is John Sinaceris, and he's at Portland at Clearmind.com. Portland at Clearmind.com. And he'll just give you everything you need to know about it.
Well, Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It's just interesting because, although we could go on, that Clearmind seems to be producing what I would think is to be the most direct approach you can think of. Hey, take a look at yourself before you move forward and take a look at somebody else, I guess.
Yes, I really appreciate your good questions, and I like these longer interviews because they give me a chance to get into the heart and soul of the material rather than just sort of chapter headings, which never does it justice. So I just really appreciate that you and I had kind of a relationship here.
Well, I couldn't help but think there was a comedian, Andrew Dice Clay,
Mm-hmm.
and I remembered it was in a movie that he was in. He says, a lot of people play hard to get, I play hard to want. And I thought to myself, that's so true. If you really want me, then here I am. But this is the way it is.
Yeah. That's very
and it
good.
sounds to me like Clearmind is one of those ways that people can come to that point where they say, well, if you want me, here it is. Because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Pretty fascinating stuff. Go ahead and give that website out again one more time.
Clearmind.com.
Clearmind.com. Doesn't get any easier than that.
That's right.
Fair enough. Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
Thanks so much, Daniel.
We want to thank you, the listeners. Find out Clearmind.com is the way that you can find out more about yourself, perhaps. That way you're ready for someone else. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us here. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.